primary websites and make it interactive. So hopefully you're seeing the screen right now. I'm going to be opening up a code editor and I'll be doing some live JavaScript demo code so you guys can see the various syntax of JavaScript. Victor, sorry, and now there should be an announcement to share an extra Notion document, which is going to include all the different kind of stuff I'm going to be going over today. So if you guys at the end of this presentation think it's a bit too quick or you need more information, it should all be available in that document. All right, so let's actually officially get started with all the syntax. So welcome to learning about JavaScript. The first thing that we're actually going to do right now is do hello world. Yes, the start of any programming language is always printing out hello world. So make sure you have a file open on your editor. If you don't have VS Code, any other there should be fine. Just make sure that your file extension ends in JS. Actually, it's fine. Yeah, ends in JS, and then you should be able to type in a file. And in order to get out hello world in JavaScript, the command for that is just console. And actually tell me if you guys think, is the text too small or too big? Too small? A bit. Let me see if I can adjust this. Better? Okay, great. All right, so this is the first command I'm going to do. Console.log is just there so that we could do a hello world. So make sure you have round brackets and then have hello world. Great start. So in JavaScript, typically you would have a semicolon at the end of every line. This is not a mandatory thing because technically your code could technically run without this, but I do recommend that you have a semicolon at the end of every line of code just to make sure that for the sake of tidiness. If you want to run this, make sure you have your terminal open. Mine is kind of expanded and it's kind of enlarged, so it can't really, but if you have VS Code, you should just be able to go up here and then go into view, and you should be able to open up the terminal. In order to run this file, type out node, and then the name of the JS file. So in my case, it's JS syntax right here. So so if you were to run that command in your command prompt, you'll see that hello world is printed to the screen. So yeah, we've made our official first step in learning JavaScript. Good. All right, okay. So after doing this, the first thing we're going to talk about in JavaScript is obviously variables, as that's the very basic fundamental part of any language. Variables are essentially containers to store values. If you guys have been doing 1.4.5, it should be something that you pretty much would know. In JavaScript, there are technically 3 different ways to assign variables. The first is using the let syntax, in which I'm going to make this a bit little. You would write let, have the name of your variable. In this case, since we're creating a website, let's say the variable is the website name, have an equal sign, and then after it have the value of this variable. So in this case, a website name could be my website. Very creative. So like this, and once we do this, we'll have assigned this variable this name and assign it this value. If we want to see what the value of this is, we're able to do, we could do a console log and have the website name, this variable here, and once we run it, if you want to run this again, it would just type node and then the name of your file again, and you'll be able to run it again. So here, if we run the JavaScript code again, we'll be able to see that it's printed out my website, which is the value of this variable. So that's one way of assigning variable. Yes. You can't see the triangle?
Hover like on the top part and keep running.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I guess this should be resolved. All right. Okay. So the next way of variables would be const variables in this case, in which we don't use let and we say use const. So in this case, a const variable would be the website info, and in this case, we could say info it's a website about images like this, and then we'll be able to print this again in the console log as well. So like this. And you'll be able to see both of these variables printed to the screen. The third way you would typically assign variables in JavaScript is using var, like this. Let's say, and here, if we run it, you'll be able to see all 3 of those variables printed to the screen. the variables. So the main difference between these kind of variables is that const variables, this one right here, its values cannot be changed. So what happens? So if we were to modify it later on here, and in JavaScript, because it's a dynamically typed language, your variables can be different types. So here we know that it's a string because it's technically text. We can change it to a number. Obviously, what's going to happen right here is that if you run this, you'll see that it's going to show up with an error that we cannot assign to const variables. The only thing we can reassign are let and var. So if we were to not do website info, we do website name, and we print it again, we'll be able to see that my website, which is what website name was, has been changed to 324, and here it's 324, and then the other variables. So that's what how you would assign variables in JavaScript. So after variables, we're going to now be talking about conditional statements, because conditional statements are an important part of your programming, as you most likely need to check different states of your website and then execute code according to those states. One of the first conditional you'll come up and see is if statements. If statements follow the syntax like this. So if, round brackets, and curly brackets. This is the code block. So this is the stuff you'll execute after your if statement is true. So in this case, let's say we're checking if the website color is red. Do note here that in JavaScript, maybe you've already done another coding language that does 2 equal signs. In JavaScript, when you're comparing two things, make sure you're using 3 equal signs, because this is the more preferred way. 2 equal signs will work, but 3 equal signs will check for both types, because JavaScript, obviously, as you know, it's possible to have different types. So having 3 equal signs will make this more of an accurate comparison. So here we could say console.log. If we run it, it's going to print out this part of code. And if this is not true, so let's say we say it's equal to yellow, and run again, it's not going to print anything, of course, because this if statement is not true. With your if statements, you can also add else ifs and else. Else ifs are essentially just another if statement, but they have to follow your original if statement. So else ifs cannot exist on their own. They have to follow another if statement. And here we can check if, since we said it was equal to yellow, we can set if website color is equal to red. And then here with curly brackets, we can do like this. So if we were to run this again, seeing these else if statement, we can see that it's going to print out it's red and not this line, because it has executed with this else if. And then else is just basically the end if all the ifs don't work. So if we were to change website color, let's change it right now to a green. You can see that it's not fitting in this condition and it doesn't fit in this condition. So it's going to go to the else, and it will, let's say, not. If we run it, it's going to print out the else statement that's in the else. After if statements, we can also look at switch case statements. Sorry? Oh, yeah, I apologize. Maybe I'll make this like this. Okay. All right. After this, we have switch statements, which are similar to if statements, except they kind of compare with one value. So in this case, if we wanted to just check what website name is, we could do a switch by entering the website name here. And then in switches, there are cases which represent every different kind of possibility that your website name could be. In this case, I could say it's equal to my website, followed by a colon, and then followed by the code you want to execute after this case is accomplished. Make sure that every one of your cases that you have a break, because how a switch statements works is if you don't have a break, it will go through all the cases trying to check for them. And if you have, say, 100 different cases, then it's not going to be very great use of your resources. So we can have another case here saying break, And at the end of your case statement, you could also have a default, which is just going to be kind of similar to an else. It's what happens when none of this is matched. So this. And you don't need a break here because it is at the end of your case. So if we were to run this, see that it goes to, yeah, since we changed website name to 324 here, as it was initially on my website, it's not going to be matching with any of this. So automatically go to default and automatically print out nothing matches. All right, that's good. Okay, and then after the switch case, we want to talk about arrays or different kind of variables technically. The main type of variable types that we've been going over are typically strings or numbers, but there are also other variable types in your program. One of them being Boolean. Boolean is essentially just a true or false. It's typically like a switch. It's one way or the other. So in this case, we could do a Boolean statement called Boolean test. And in this case, we can say it's true, or we can say it's false. So that is a Boolean variable. And after this, we can also, another data type that we want to talk about in JavaScript is arrays. So arrays is essentially a way to hold multiple values in your code. It could be useful if you have a bunch of things you need to keep track of and you need them all in one variable. So one example could be, say, the customers you have. So here, if we want to declare an array of variables, we could do it like this. So do a const and then say customers is the variable you want to hold all your customers, equal. Make sure you do square brackets, and inside the square brackets, it's going to be all the different kind of values inside your array. So first could be, say, my name. Make sure they're separated by commas because that's the only way they can be separate elements inside this array. Like this. So if we were to print this right now, if we look here, we're going to see that. All right, I will get rid of this for now so that there'll be. Okay, if we were to print this to the screen right now, print the array, it'll be able to see that it has this array right here. If you want to see specific elements inside the array, you would use the square bracket notation. And so let's say you want to access Shirley, which is at the first index, you would say customers, square index, and put in 0. Because in arrays in programming, the first index is the 0th element. So if we were to do that, it's going to print out Shirley. So that is it. So that's the thing for arrays. If you want to add stuff to this already existing array, you can do a method push. And once you do that, if you were to print the array again, you'll see that now it has that new element right there. Pushing will push whatever element you want to push at the end of your array. All right, so arrays is like that. There are also other methods in arrays that you can probably look at when you're later on in the website, but this is just a very basics. Another kind of data type that's very important in JavaScript is objects. Objects are essentially ways to also have elements in a kind of list, but instead of having indexes, they're kind of labeled by keys and value pairs. So similar to how, think of an object as a list of mailboxes, and to access each mailbox, you'll look for a person's name and that respective mailbox instead of, say, numbers at a lockers. So in order to do an object, let's say we do a car object. It'll, again, be the const, the name, and then equal. This time, instead of square brackets, we do curly brackets. And this time, we do a car project. We could do the different properties of a car. So for example, one property could be company. And here, make sure you have a colon after your property name, because this is the way you would be able to identify this specific property. So in this case, we could say Ford. And then we could also have a another property called model. In this case, we could say Mustang. And then we can have another third property, and this time we can call it color, and then we can say it's red. So after you do this, you would have on your first object, and if you were to print it to the screen right now, you'll be able to see that you have printed an object in which everything is kind of in these key value pairs. All right, so If you want to add stuff, or if you add stuff to an object, it would be via two different kind of notations. First being car object, and then followed by whatever you want to add to it. So in this case, maybe you want to add price. You would put a dot notation and then set the price like that. If you run it again, you'll be able to see that it has added a new property of price being 32,000. All right. Afterwards, if you want, there's also another way of doing this, which is to do it via the bracket notation. But in this case, inside the square bracket, it has to be in double quotes. So let's say if you want to add wheel size, and we wanted to say it was equal to, again, it will look like this, and it will have a wheel size. Note here that if you want to access these specific properties, you would also do so via the dot notation and the square bracket notation with the double quotes. The difference between these two is mainly that the bracket notation allows you to use variables, and this does not. So if I were to right now write a variable called, let me just call it test for now, and then I were to call it wheel size, I can do this, put in square brackets, do test. And if I were to run this, it will give me big, which is what wheel size is. But if I were to do the same thing with a dot notation, like this, dot test, which is what this variable is, it will give me undefined, because what the dot notation looks for is like this field right here, and like literally this field, so test. And since it doesn't exist, it's not going to return anything. It'll be undefined. So that should be the bulk of it for objects. There are other things you'll be working with objects, as when you return data in JavaScript, it's very likely going to be in JSON, which is basically in object form. So after this, let's talk quickly about loops. In JavaScript, there are many different kinds of for loops. While loops are pretty simple, simply determined by conditions. So one condition we can do is with test num. And here is also a condition we test for. So we can say if this number is more than 0. And then we can in here console log test num. So here will be code we execute, and then we can subtract test num. So we can modify it right here. Make sure that you have something to modify this the variable using in the while loop, because if you don't, it will become a loop that does not stop, and it's not going to be great for your program because it'll be stuck in a loop. So here, make sure you have minus minus. Minus minus is a way to just subtract this value by 1. So if we were to run this, and there's an error. Sorry. Oh yeah, constant variable, my bad. Here is an error with sign, so it should be let. We can see here that it prints out all the different numbers, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it stops at 1 because then it becomes less than 0. That's a while loop. We also have for loops, in which there's different ways to initialize. Well, there's different for loops in JavaScript. The first is just a very basic for loop, you've probably seen in other languages. First, let's split into 3 parts. First being initialization. So we have it 0, I less equal to 5, I plus plus. And then here we can do console log So here, if we run this, we'll see that the for loop will run the values 5 times, because that's how we kind of determine the interval here. This is initializing at 0. This is initializing the max. This is telling it that it will add 1. So each instance, it's going to print this. So in this case, we do it 5 times. It has printed out 0 5 times. Yeah, right here. All right, so that's it for loops. Up next is probably one of the last parts is functions. So functions are an essential part of JavaScript, and it's probably something that you'll most often work with in your template and work, because functions are the most essential part of kind of rewriting your code. So in JavaScript, there are really 2 ways to define a function. The first is via declaration. So this is the first way to write a function. You write function, the name of the function, the round bracket and then the curly brackets. Function is essentially a way to execute a bunch of code. So here, within the round brackets are parameters. So in this case, if I want to dye my hair, I would maybe want the parameter to be the hair color. So in this case, I would just write this here to color. And then here, I can write a simple line of code that just says, like this. Good thing about functions is that you can call them anywhere in the code. So right now that I have written this, it's not actually going to do anything, but I need to call it somewhere. So I can call dye hair and then call it with the round brackets and then input whatever field I want. So in this case, I may want to say yellow. So now that I've called it, if I were to run this, we'll see that at the bottom, it has run this line of code right here. Console.log, I have dyed my hair, this field, this parameter. Another way to write functions is through arrow functions, or I guess function expressions. And that is when you assign this to a variable. So in this case, you could do, let me remove this. You could do dye hair, kind of like how you would declare a variable equal, and then do function like this. So if you run this, it runs exactly the same way as the previous function. The only difference is that this is assigned to a variable and you just call this. The good thing about this is that this allows you to use arrow functions, which is something that it's a new thing that's come up in JavaScript. So arrow functions are where you don't write function at all. You delete this and instead you put an arrow between here and this section of code. So this is good because with this, you are able to just write code really quickly. If they only have one kind of variable, you don't even need round brackets. You could just do hair dye like this. And it worked, auto saves it. But if we were to run this with arrow functions, it would do the exact same thing. So arrow functions are very similar to regular functions, but arrow functions do differ a little bit with normal functions, mainly with a lot of like really deep like system ways level stuff with like the this keyword, which is not very important right now, but just know that there is a difference between arrow functions and just regular functions. These functions are more useful when you're using a template, as a lot of you are in React, and a lot of the function you'll see is probably written in arrow functions. So after this, the only one that I want you guys to know about is the map, which is essentially a way to manipulate arrays. So if we get rid of this, we know that we don't have array right here. So one thing that we can do is if we wanted, instead of having this be a bunch of strings, we could have it so that this is a bunch of numbers. Like this. If we wanted a new array of all of these elements, but we wanted them all to be multiplied by 3, we could use the map function, which essentially is customers dot map. Yeah, there's some. Yeah, right. Anyways, seems to be there. Anyways, so yeah, that should be, yeah. After I've covered everything here, I think I've covered most of this JavaScript syntax that we need. If you guys have any more questions, make sure you look at the document, which should be here. So if you guys go to the announcement, there should be a document like this, which you have all the sample code. So yeah, that would be the end of this introduction. I will probably give hands to Richard for the next. All right. Then we'll...
Transition time.
Okay, yeah.